Have you ever felt like the world only values you when you're accessible? When you answer quickly, when you smile on demand, when you're always available to help, to explain, to fix, to give, even if inside you're falling apart. You've been trained to believe that being present makes you valuable, that your availability defines your worth, that silence equals distance, and distance equals rejection. But what if they lied? What if the version of you that always replies, always forgives, always says yes, is not kindness, but conditioning? What if the habit of being emotionally available to everyone is the very thing draining your power? Let me tell you something dangerous. The most powerful people in any room are rarely the loudest. They are the ones who don't flinch, who don't explain, who don't rush to respond just to ease the tension. They're the ones who withhold, not out of arrogance, but out of sovereignty. They know something that most people don't. Silence breaks patterns. Absence creates crisis. Stillness reveals truth. You see, people don't manipulate you through violence. They do it through expectation. They use your predictability, your automatic empathy, your instant reactions as a lever. They know what button to press, and you've left every button exposed. You call it being nice. I call it being unguarded. You call it loyalty. I call it emotional exposure. Because what most people call connection is often just quiet dependency disguised as love. There's a reason you feel tired after some conversations. There's a reason your chest tightens when you receive that one message. There's a reason you dread being there for people who never truly see you. It's not because you're selfish. It's because your system is screaming. You've made yourself emotionally available to everyone, even those who only come around to take. You confuse being needed with being valued. You confuse always being reachable with being respected. But ask yourself this: who really gets angry when you stop replying? Who gets uncomfortable when you pause instead of pleasing? Who calls you different when you start protecting your peace? The answer isn't about them. It's about the way you've been trained to betray yourself. There's a form of slavery that doesn't need chains. It only needs your politeness, your guilt, your fear of disappointing people who were never really there for you. You've been taught that silence is passive. But I'm here to tell you, silence, when chosen consciously, is a declaration of war. Not against others, but against the version of yourself that keeps giving without receiving, that keeps reacting without reflection, that keeps surviving in a world where your boundaries are treated like inconveniences. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But let's go further. Everything that manipulates you exposes what you haven't healed. That's why silence is terrifying, not because it's empty, but because it reflects. It reflects the chaos in those who depended on your imbalance. It reflects the truth you've been avoiding by constantly being busy. It reflects every part of you that has been running from discomfort by running towards validation. So I'll ask you again, how long will you react to everything that pokes your old wounds? How long will you stay in conversations that drain you just because silence might feel lonely? How long will you confuse emotional exhaustion with being a good person? Here's the truth. The more available you are, the less you're respected. What is always present becomes background noise. What is easily given is rarely appreciated. What is abundant becomes disposable. You think your kindness is seen? It's not. It's expected, consumed, forgotten, until the day you stop. Until the day you say nothing, reply to no one, withhold your presence. That's when they notice. That's when they panic. That's when they realize you were the one feeding the dynamic all along. Don't confuse peace with absence. And don't confuse withdrawal with weakness. When silence is chosen, when distance is conscious, when no becomes sacred, you begin to re-enter your own life. The life that was once sacrificed for the sake of keeping others comfortable. This is where it begins. Not with revenge, not with confrontation, not with arguments, but with the quiet, internal decision to stop explaining, to stop apologizing for your rest, for your no, for your space. You owe nothing to those who only know you through the mask you've worn for their comfort. Let them call you strange. Let them say you've changed. Let them feel confused, because that confusion is the space where your new self is born. You are not cold, you are not arrogant, you are not distant. You are finally protecting what's sacred, your energy, your rhythm, your center. When you stop being available, you don't disappear, you reappear. To yourself. Let's talk about something no one taught you to protect. Your energy. Not your physical energy, not your time, not your money, but the subtle, invisible force that moves through your thoughts, emotions, intentions. The core of what Carl Jung called psychic energy. You may not see it, but you feel it. Every time you walk away from a conversation feeling drained. Every time you say yes with your mouth while your body screams no. Every time you stay in a room just because leaving might look impolite. That's not fatigue. That's not introversion. That's not social anxiety. That's your inner system telling you you are leaking energy where it isn't honored. You weren't taught to protect this. You were taught to give it away as proof of your goodness. Smile when it's uncomfortable. Answer when you don't want to. Fix what's not yours to fix. Absorb pain that was never yours to carry. And in doing so, you confuse compliance with compassion and reactivity with love. But ask yourself honestly, how much of your energy is spent on things that don't nourish you? How many urgent responses are actually manipulations? How often do you feel responsible for other people's feelings, even when they never feel responsible for yours? Carl Jung didn't see the mind as just a thinking machine. He saw it as a vital energy system, constantly allocating power based on our unconscious patterns. And when you're not aware of those patterns, your energy gets hijacked by guilt, by fear, by the desire to be liked. Every reaction to please, to justify, to explain is a transaction, and the currency is your peace. People often say, I don't know why I'm so exhausted. But here's why. You're carrying the emotional weight of people who never asked how heavy it is for you. You're holding up conversations where you're not heard. You're holding space for people who collapse into you, but never offer to hold you back. You're maintaining roles you didn't choose. Caretaker, peacekeeper, translator of unspoken needs, and every time you maintain that role without question, you bleed energy. Quietly, consistently, until emptiness feels normal. But here's the turning point. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to be unavailable. You're allowed to protect your inner fire from the winds of obligation. You're allowed to say, this drains me, and I'm not doing it anymore. Because your energy is not infinite. It is not public property. It is not proof of your character. It is your lifeline. And without it, you cannot heal, cannot see, cannot grow. Let me put it differently. Every time you explain yourself unnecessarily, you trade clarity for chaos. Every time you engage in debates that go nowhere, you trade peace for being right. Every time you rush to comfort someone who mistreats you, you trade dignity for the illusion of control. Is that a fair trade? Carl Jung wrote, what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. When you keep reacting to the same types of people, when you fall into the same emotional traps, you're not being empathetic. You're reinforcing your own unconscious programming. You're keeping the dynamic alive, the one where you're the one who bends while others stand tall. But when you stop, when you pause, when you don't explain, something powerful happens. The entire system loses its grip on you. Because silence is not absence. It is presence without permission. It is the choice not to give your sacred energy to nonsense. It is the decision to let discomfort exist without trying to fix it. It is the power to stand still while the world demands you dance. You don't need to justify your silence. It is self-evident. You don't need to explain your retreat. It is sacred. You don't need to feel guilty for choosing yourself. It is the most natural thing in the world. But after a lifetime of self-abandonment, choosing yourself can feel like betrayal. To others, but mostly to the old version of you, the one who was trained to be small, agreeable, compliant. So here's your real task. Reclaim your energy, and do it unapologetically. Not by running, not by isolating, not by punishing others, but by pausing, breathing, observing, by asking yourself with radical honesty, does this deserve my energy? Will this reaction build me or bleed me? Am I saying yes just to avoid being misunderstood? Because let me tell you the truth, many won't. People don't want your wholeness. They want your usefulness. And when you stop being useful to their dysfunction, they call you distant, cold, selfish. That's not your shame. That's their mask falling off. They were never relating to you. They were relating to the function you performed. And now that you've stopped performing, they no longer know what to do with you. Let them be confused. That's how clarity begins. They won't understand your silence at first. They'll think you're angry. They'll think you're bitter. They'll assume you're building walls, because they have never seen you without your performance. They've never met the version of you that doesn't explain, doesn't appease, doesn't rush to repair the tension. And when the mask of availability is gone, people panic. Not because they care about your well-being, but because your silence removes their access, their control, their emotional supply. Here's a hard truth. People are not addicted to who you are. They are addicted to what you give them. The validation, the attention, the comfort. When you become unavailable, you expose how little of the relationship was built on mutuality. They weren't loving you. They were using your openness as a mirror, as a pillow, as a source of certainty in their own chaos. And now that you've stepped back, the mirror is gone, and they're forced to face the blur. But let me ask you, why does their discomfort still hurt you? Why does being misunderstood still haunt you? Why does walking away, even for your own peace, still feel like a crime? Because deep down, you were taught that your worth depends on how well others feel in your presence. That if someone is uncomfortable with you, it means you must fix something. But let me say this clearly. You are not responsible for other people's inability to sit with their own emotions. Not anymore. There's a difference between kindness and emotional servitude, between compassion and chronic compliance, between presence and performance. You weren't born to be a sponge, you were born to be whole. But somewhere along the way, you learned that love means absorbing, not just receiving. That support means sacrifice, that connection means contortion, that empathy means erasure. So you bent, you shrank, you made yourself smaller so others could feel bigger. And it worked, until it didn't, until your body started breaking down, until your mind became a battlefield of silent battles, until your spirit whispered, "This is not peace, this is people-pleasing dressed as virtue." That's when the real awakening began. Not in rage, not in confrontation, but in quiet, painful clarity. The kind that comes at 2 a.m. when you realize you've been present for everyone except yourself. They will call it withdrawal. You will call it survival. They will call you cold. You will call it returning to warmth. They will say you've changed, and you have. You've changed from someone who abandons themselves for acceptance to someone who accepts themselves even at the cost of being abandoned. And here comes the test. Will you stay silent when your name is twisted? Will you stay grounded when your distance is misread? Will you stay kind, not to others first, but to yourself, when guilt knocks on the door again? Because guilt doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It often means you're doing something different. Something untrained. Something radically unfamiliar. Like putting your energy first. That's what disconnection does. It doesn't just pull you away from others, it pulls you back into yourself. And most people aren't ready for that version of you, because it doesn't serve their narrative anymore. Let them rewrite it. Let them get it wrong. Let them talk. You don't owe anyone the version of you they created in their mind. You've been assigned roles your whole life. The good one, the strong one, the patient one, the one who understands, the one who doesn't need much, the one who can handle anything. And maybe for a while you believed those roles were noble, because they came with compliments, with smiles, with a sense of being seen, even if it was through a lens that never truly reflected you. But there comes a moment when you realize you've been praised for how well you disappear, for how little you ask, for how silently you carry what others won't, for how perfectly you fulfill the version of yourself that keeps others comfortable. And in that moment, something inside you breaks, not with a scream, but with a whisper that says, "This isn't me. I never agreed to this." You didn't choose this script. You inherited it from wounded parents, distracted teachers, tired lovers, fragile friends, from a culture that rewards your sacrifice but punishes your sovereignty. So now, you start unlearning. You stop apologizing when you're not available. You stop rushing to say yes. You stop performing the role they wrote for you. And that's when the pushback begins. People don't react to your truth. They react to the loss of their comfort. You were never just a friend. You were a therapist they never paid. You were a mirror they depended on to feel okay. You were the background character in a drama they cast themselves as the lead. But now you're stepping off their stage, and they're losing their script. At first, you may feel guilt. You'll wonder if you're being selfish. You'll question whether you've become too much. Because for years, your self-worth was tied to how little space you took up. You mastered the art of shrinking. You knew how to listen without interrupting, how to smile when your soul was tired, how to soothe others while your own wounds went untouched. But the more you grow, the more you feel the weight of that shrinking, and you begin to see the truth. They didn't love you for who you were. They loved you for the role you played. That's why your silence feels like betrayal to them. That's why your no sounds like aggression. That's why your boundaries feel like abandonment. You're not hurting them. You're just not soothing their dysfunction anymore. And in their world, that is violence. Because in their world, your job was always to make them feel better, even at the cost of your own peace. Let me be clear. You are not responsible for the discomfort people feel when you stop living according to their script. You were not born to be the supporting actor in someone else's story. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to redefine yourself. You are allowed to say, this version of me no longer serves who I'm becoming. They will resist it. They will test you. They will try to guilt you back into compliance. And here's the moment of truth. Will you fold? Or will you rise? Because the path of individuation, as Jung called it, is not the path of being liked. It is the path of becoming whole. And wholeness often looks like rebellion to those who only loved you fragmented. You will feel alone for a while, not because you are wrong, but because your old life revolved around being agreeable, and now you're becoming aligned. There's a difference. Agreeable people gain approval. Aligned people gain peace. And peace is expensive. It costs you every false identity you ever accepted just to be liked. You may find yourself staring into the mirror, wondering who you are without the applause, without the labels, without the performance. And that's where the healing begins. Not in becoming someone new, but in finally being who you were before the world told you who to be. You were not born to be palatable. You were not born to fit inside their narrative. You were born to become, and becoming is messy, uncomfortable, disruptive, unapologetic. And if it costs you connections that were built on your silence, then it's not a loss, it's liberation. They'll say you've changed. You'll say, I've returned. They'll say you're different now. You'll say, I'm finally myself. They'll say, I miss the old you. You'll smile and whisper, so did I. But I had to let her go. Not because she wasn't kind, but because she was tired of being kind to everyone except herself. And here's the most powerful truth. You don't need to burn bridges. You just need to stop lighting yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't need to explain. You don't need to prove. You don't need to earn your own presence. You just need to choose it. Every day, every moment, every breath. The world will not applaud your liberation. It will question it, resist it, challenge it, because your awakening disturbs the structure. Because your boundaries break the contract they never admitted existed. You stay small, and we stay comfortable. But that contract is expired. You are no longer available for emotional labor that drains you. No longer here to keep the peace by losing yourself. Your presence now comes with discernment. Your energy now has requirements. Your kindness now includes you. And that, my friend, is dangerous to anyone who benefited from the version of you that didn't know your worth. So let them misunderstand. Let them walk away. Let them call you selfish. Because if choosing your mental health, your energy, your truth makes you selfish, then may you be the most selfish soul the world has ever seen. You are not breaking hearts, you are breaking patterns. You are not abandoning people. You are abandoning the roles that required you to abandon yourself. This is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is sacred rebellion. Let this be the chapter where you stop shrinking, where you stop folding, where you stop apologizing for being too loud, too soft, too much, too tired, too quiet. Let this be the moment you remember. You don't exist to be understood. You exist to be free. And freedom always begins the moment you break the role they assigned you. There is a silence that feels like death. It's the one that comes after you've said no to the world and the world stops answering back. It's the stillness after you've pulled away from the noise, but before you've learned to live in the quiet. It's not peaceful yet. It's not empowering yet. It just feels like absence. You walk through your days like a ghost in your own life. The people who you used to call don't. The validation you used to chase feels empty. The roles you used to play don't fit anymore. And what's left? You. And a strange sense of space that you don't know how to fill. This is the part no one talks about. Not the empowerment. Not the boundary setting. Not the triumphant return. But the sacred ache that follows awakening. The disorientation. The grief. The emptiness that settles in once the noise is gone. You thought choosing yourself would feel like a celebration. But right now it just feels like loss. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are just finally alone with the truth. Not the truth they told you, not the truth you borrowed to survive, but the kind of truth that only reveals itself when you are no longer busy being someone else. Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And that's what this is. You're not isolated. You're just out of sync with the world you used to belong to, because the old version of you fit into systems built on self-abandonment. Now that you no longer fit, everything around you begins to fall away. You start noticing things you never had space to notice before. The way your breath hesitates before you speak. The way your body tightens when someone asks for more than you can give. The subtle ache behind your eyes that's been there for years, but you were too busy being strong to feel it. This loneliness isn't hollow. It's alive. It carries your name. It echoes with all the versions of you that you've silenced to be accepted. And now, for the first time, they begin to return. You remember the child who didn't know how to explain her sadness, the teenager who traded authenticity for approval, the adult who kept choosing responsibility over rest, image over intimacy, performance over presence. They all sit with you now. Not to haunt you, but to ask, can we finally come home? And this is the moment of reckoning. You can either run, back to the noise, back to the roles, back to being what the world needs. Or you can stay. Stay in the stillness. Stay in the ache. Stay in this sacred pause long enough to finally meet the real you. Not the you they sculpted. Not the you they approved. Not the you they clung to when they needed something. But the you that's always been waiting beneath the masks, beneath the tension, beneath the guilt. You will want to fill the silence. You will want to distract yourself. You will crave something, anything, to numb the unfamiliar stillness. But don't. This silence is not empty. It is preparing a space. It is unmaking everything that was built on fear, so that something sacred can be born from truth. This stillness is not the end. It is the beginning. But it will not feel like rebirth, not yet. It will feel like fog, like floating, like walking barefoot on ground you don't yet trust. You'll wake up and wonder what day it is, what version of you is rising, what you even believe in anymore. This is not depression. This is the dismantling of illusions. Your mind is no longer being fed by constant stimulation. Your identity is no longer being shaped by other people's demands. And now all that's left is the raw material of who you truly are. And here's what you'll discover. You don't need to be someone. You just need to be here. Not achieving, not impressing, not fixing yourself. Just breathing, just noticing, just allowing. For the first time, you begin to realize presence is enough. Your value isn't tied to your productivity. Your worth doesn't rise and fall with how useful you are. Your existence is not a performance. It's a frequency. A still, steady flame that was always burning quietly underneath the chaos. This is sacred loneliness because it isn't just the absence of others, it is the presence of yourself. The self that was never allowed to speak without being edited. The self that was never allowed to rest without guilt. The self that was never allowed to just be. Now she's here. Now he's rising. Now you're remembering. And slowly, moment by moment, a peace begins to arrive. Not dramatic, not euphoric, not even noticeable at first. Just a soft exhale, a loosening of the grip, a quiet return to your own skin. You begin to notice that nothing outside you has changed, but something inside you no longer needs to. The need to explain fades. The urge to perform dissolves. The craving to be understood softens into stillness. You stop needing to be seen because you're finally seeing yourself. You catch your reflection, not to fix anything, but to witness. You sit in silence, not to escape the world, but to arrive in yourself. You walk slowly, not because you're lost, but because you've stopped rushing toward things that were never meant for you in the first place. And here's the miracle of sacred loneliness. You become your own companion. You become the safe place you've searched for, the voice you've longed to hear, the presence you thought would come from someone else. You realize the loneliness wasn't punishment. It was purification. It wasn't abandonment. It was alignment. It wasn't loss. It was space, made for the one who was always missing from your own life, you. So let this silence stay. Let it stretch. Let it shape you. Let it teach you that you never needed to fill the space. You just needed to become the space. Not with noise, not with identity, not with answers, but with presence. Because the most powerful version of you was never the one who knew everything. It was the one who could sit in sacred loneliness and still feel whole. Rebirth doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes quietly. It doesn't knock. It slips in after all the doors you used to keep open have closed. It comes when you stop trying to feel better and instead start feeling what's really there. At first, it's subtle. You notice that your breathing is deeper, that your reactions are slower, that silence no longer scares you. You go a whole afternoon without checking your phone, not because you're trying to detox, but because you forgot you needed the noise. You stand at your window, watching light shift through trees, and feel a strange, unfamiliar emotion. Not excitement, not achievement, just peace. And for the first time, you don't try to capture it. You don't post it. You don't label it. You just let it be. This is how rebirth begins, not by becoming someone new, but by remembering who you were before the world told you who to be, before you became the fixer, the performer, the strong one, the always available one. You start shedding those skins like clothes that no longer fit, and underneath, there's someone quiet, soft, and terrifyingly real. You don't recognize this version of you, not because it's unfamiliar, but because it's been buried for so long under survival. This you isn't impressive, not strategic, not curated. This you is present, unfiltered, free. And the most surprising part, you begin to love them. You begin to love your slowness, your quiet, your need for space, your unwillingness to entertain what no longer resonates. You stop apologizing for how much you feel, for how often you need solitude, for how deep your inner world goes. You stop explaining your boundaries, stop shrinking your needs, stop editing your presence. You begin to realize you are not too much. You were just trying to fit into spaces that were too small. This love is different. It doesn't rush in. It doesn't sweep you off your feet. It doesn't promise forever. It simply stays. It sits beside you in the morning light. It walks with you in quiet evenings. It shows up in the way you no longer abandon yourself, just to keep someone else comfortable. It appears in your choices, the ones that used to cost you your peace. Now they protect it. You begin to notice that you no longer chase, not attention, not approval, not even closure. You stop reaching out just to be reminded that you matter. You stop proving that you're worthy. You stop asking questions that only ever lead to more silence. Instead, you listen, not to the noise, but to the stillness beneath it. And in that stillness, you hear something you forgot was possible. Your own voice, unfiltered, unapologetic, unafraid. You're not healed yet, but you're healing. You're not whole yet, but you're returning. And most importantly, you're not pretending anymore. And that is the most honest beginning of love you will ever know. There comes a moment when you stop fixing yourself, not because you've given up, but because you finally realized you were never broken. You just learned to see yourself through broken mirrors. You learned to define your worth by how much others wanted you. You learned to value yourself through their gaze. But their gaze was blurred, distorted, tainted by their own wounds. And now you are learning to see again, through your own eyes, from your own center. You no longer need to be the best. You no longer need to be perfect. You no longer need to be impressive. You just want to be real, honest, present, grounded. And strangely, as you release the pressure to be extraordinary, you start becoming someone rare. Not because you shine brighter than others, but because you are no longer trying to outshine yourself. You begin to embrace your contradictions. The part of you that wants solitude, and the part that longs to be held. The part that's soft and gentle, and the part that roars when crossed. The part that doubts, and the part that knows deeply. You no longer force these pieces to agree. You just let them live, let them breathe, let them belong to you for once, without apology. This is rebirth. Not a reinvention, not a performance, but a homecoming to your stillness, to your enoughness, to your never needed to be anything else-ness. You don't need to be loved to feel love, because you have become the source, not in some grand poetic way, but in the quiet choices you make each time you honor your peace. Each time you say no, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence for your energy. Each time you rest, not because you've earned it, but because you exist. Each time you forgive yourself, not to forget the past, but to stop carrying what no longer belongs to you. This is what self-love looks like now, not bubble baths and affirmations, but boundaries, solitude, truth-telling. It's the strength to disappoint others rather than betray yourself. It's the grace to walk away from chaos, even if your heart still hopes it will change. It's the clarity to know I don't need permission to choose myself again, and again, and again. And in this way, without trying to fix anything, without rushing to arrive, you return to yourself, to your breath, to your place in the world, not as a performer, not as a pleaser, but as a presence. As someone who once sought love and became it instead, you will be misunderstood. It's not a maybe, it's not a risk, it's a certainty. If you choose authenticity, if you choose boundaries, if you choose silence when others expect noise, you will be misunderstood. They'll say you changed, that you think you're better now, that you're cold, distant, selfish. They'll say you stopped caring, that you've become hard, that you've lost yourself. But you'll know, you didn't lose yourself. You found yourself. And they just didn't recognize the version of you that's no longer shaped by their expectations. It hurts at first, because you want to be known, you want to be seen clearly, you want your heart to be understood, especially by those who claim to care. But here's the truth. Most people don't love you. They love their version of you. And when you stop performing that version, they don't feel love anymore. Not because you're unlovable, but because they were never really seeing you in the first place. So what do you do with that? Do you explain harder? Speak louder? Defend your choices? You could. But it won't land. Because they're not listening with curiosity. They're listening with attachment to the old you. They're not hearing what you're saying. They're filtering it through who you used to be for them. And that version is now gone. There is great power in not needing to be understood. At first it feels like loss, but then it feels like peace. Because when you stop chasing validation, you reclaim all the energy you once spent trying to explain yourself. All those clarifications, all those late-night messages, all those mental rehearsals of what you wish you'd said differently. You don't need them anymore. Because now you understand something deeper. Being misunderstood is not failure. It's freedom. When you can let people be wrong about you and still keep your peace, you have arrived. When you no longer rush to correct their narrative, because you know your truth doesn't need a spokesperson, you are truly free. This isn't arrogance, it's inner authority. This isn't pride, it's sovereignty. You begin to see that not everyone deserves access to your truth, that your energy is sacred, and clarity is a gift, not an obligation. Some people misunderstand you on purpose, because your truth threatens their illusion, because your silence exposes their noise, because your growth reminds them of their stagnation. And no matter how gently you speak, they will hear offense, because they are not listening to understand, they are listening to protect their projection. So let them mislabel you, let them build their stories, let them echo their assumptions to anyone who will listen. You're no longer performing in that theater. You've left the stage. You've stopped auditioning for approval. Now, you're living behind the curtain, where it's quieter, truer, and infinitely more peaceful. When you stop trying to prove who you are, you become unmanipulable. Because manipulation thrives on your need to be seen a certain way. It pulls strings of guilt. It whispers, "Don't you care what they think?" It dangles silence like punishment. It withdraws affection to make you chase. But you don't chase anymore. You don't explain. You don't shrink to fit back into roles you've outgrown. Because you've realized, if someone needs you to be small in order to stay close, they were never standing beside you, they were standing on top of you. Let them fall. Let the image they built of you collapse. Let the version of you they controlled dissolve. You're not responsible for maintaining their comfort. You're not a canvas for projection. You're not here to be easy to understand. You are here to be real, to be whole, to be alive. Even if that aliveness confuses them, even if your truth disturbs their narrative, even if your light casts a shadow they refuse to face, they will say you're too much. You'll smile, knowing that just means you're no longer manageable. They will say you've changed. You'll nod, because you were never meant to stay the same. They will say, you used to be so kind, and you'll respond, I still am, but now I include myself in that kindness. At some point, you stop arguing. Not because you've lost, but because the need to win was never yours to begin with. You stop defending. Not because you're guilty, but because your innocence is no longer up for negotiation. You stop clarifying. Not because you have nothing to say, but because your energy is too sacred to be spent proving what is already true inside you. You no longer flinch when someone misunderstands your silence. Because you've learned. Your peace is not a PR campaign. It doesn't need spin. It doesn't need support. It just needs space. You no longer crumble when someone calls you cold, because they're mistaking your clarity for cruelty. You no longer shrink when someone walks away, because you're not afraid of being alone with someone who finally sees you clearly. Yourself. And in this stillness, the very one that used to feel like exile, you find something unexpected. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from escaping, but the kind that comes from staying exactly where you are, exactly as you are, even when no one understands you. Especially then. Because you are not here to be decoded. You are here to be, and that is more than enough. Detachment is not coldness. It's not disconnection. It's not indifference. It's not apathy. Detachment is clarity. It's the ability to witness your emotions without becoming your emotions. It's standing in the middle of a storm and choosing not to identify as the rain. You still feel, deeply, honestly, fully, but you no longer drown in the tide of every passing wave. You no longer mistake sadness for truth. You no longer confuse fear with intuition. You no longer call anxiety a sign that something outside you must be fixed. You start realizing, not everything you feel is fact, and not every feeling needs a reaction. Emotional detachment is not about numbing. It's about knowing when to breathe instead of react, pause instead of pursue, observe instead of obey. Because when you are ruled by emotion, you are predictable, reactive, manipulable. But when you can feel everything without doing everything your feelings demand, you become powerful. You no longer text just because you're lonely. You no longer respond just because you're angry. You no longer explain just because you're misunderstood. You sit, you feel, you wait, and you ask yourself, is this emotion asking to be expressed or simply witnessed and released? Most of the time, it's the latter. You also stop trying to manage everyone else's emotions. You stop walking on eggshells, stop softening your truth, stop bending your boundaries just to avoid someone else's reaction. Because you finally understood, their emotions are not your responsibility. Their triggers are not your burden. Their discomfort is not your cue to abandon yourself. This is not cruelty. This is clarity. And clarity feels offensive to those who've relied on your emotional compliance. They'll say you're distant. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you used to care more. But what they really mean is, you used to make my feelings your job. Now you don't. And I don't know how to handle myself without you adjusting for me. That's when you see it. How much of your life was spent regulating other people's nervous systems at the cost of your own? How many times you said yes just to avoid their mood? How many times you smiled to keep things from falling apart? How many times you made yourself small just to keep the peace? And how peace was never really present, only your suppression was. Emotional detachment is reclaiming your nervous system. It's saying, I will not regulate you anymore. I will not rescue you from your discomfort. I will not contort myself to keep you from facing your own feelings. Not because you don't care, but because you finally care about yourself too. You begin to see that healing doesn't always look like glowing. Sometimes it looks like stepping back, not ghosting, not punishing, just no longer showing up where you're not met with respect. You stop texting first. You stop explaining the same things to the same people. You stop volunteering to be the emotional filter for everyone else's chaos. And in that space, you finally meet yourself. At first, it feels unfamiliar, like loneliness, like selfishness, like guilt. But that's just your conditioning unraveling. You've been taught that love means sacrifice, that to be good means to be emotionally available, even at the cost of your own stability. But now, you're unlearning. You're redefining love as something that includes you, not something that erases you. And this is what emotional detachment reveals. You don't need to fix their feelings to protect your connection. You only need to stay connected to yourself. Because the moment you abandon yourself to maintain a bond, that bond becomes a cage. And you start mistaking anxiety for love, obligation for loyalty, pain for depth. But when you detach, truly detach, you begin to breathe again. You feel the difference between holding space and being held hostage. You stop apologizing for how much peace costs. You stop labeling discomfort as betrayal. And you begin to trust that anything requiring you to betray your own nervous system is not love. It's control. Now your peace is not passive. It's intentional. You don't stay silent because you're afraid. You stay silent because you've learned. Not everything deserves a reaction. Not everyone deserves an explanation. You don't withdraw because you're hurt. You withdraw because your presence is no longer offered to places that can't hold it with care. You don't shut down, you rise above, not to escape, but to observe, to choose, to lead yourself instead of being led by the chaos of others. This is emotional detachment. It's emotional mastery. It's feeling everything, but not obeying everything. It's being rooted, unmoved, clear. It's standing at the center of your own being, while the world keeps spinning and saying, I will not be rushed, I will not be pulled, I will not abandon myself for the comfort of anyone else. And in this stillness you become deeply, powerfully calm. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped letting other people's storms decide the weather inside your soul. You've spent most of your life seeking love, understanding, purpose, peace, something, anything to tell you that you're okay, that you're enough, that you belong. You sought it in people, in performance, in possessions, in philosophy, in spiritual paths dressed in ancient robes and modern language. And for a while the seeking felt noble, like a journey, like growth, like the very essence of what it means to be human. But one day, you feel it, the exhaustion, not physical, not emotional, but soul-deep tiredness, the fatigue of always searching but never truly arriving. You realize you've built your identity around a question. How do I get there? Where there is constantly moving, constantly shifting, always just out of reach. Even your healing became a destination. Even your awakening became something to achieve. And you begin to wonder, what if the search is the problem? What if I've been running in circles while holding the thing I've been looking for? It's terrifying to even ask that, because seeking gives you purpose, a story, a mission. Letting go of the search feels like death, a kind of ego death, where the seeker dissolves and nothing rises to replace it. Just this, just here, just now. No striving, no becoming better, no better to become, only presence, only being. And in that emptiness, which used to scare you, something begins to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. You stop searching and you start seeing, not the answers, but the silence beneath the questions, not the path, but the ground beneath your feet, not the next level, but the breath you're in right now. When you stop seeking, you don't become passive, you become present. There's a difference. Passivity is numbness, a shutting down, a giving up. But presence is awakening. It's the full arrival into what already is, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. You no longer chase after meaning, because you realize meaning arises when you stop trying to create it. It reveals itself in quiet glances, in morning light on your skin, in the breath that doesn't ask for permission to keep you alive. It's not something you add to life, it's something you remove the noise around to finally hear. And this is the great paradox. The more you chase peace, the more it evades you. The more you chase love, the more conditional it becomes. The more you chase enlightenment, the more the ego disguises itself as a spiritual self who's still desperate to achieve something. You begin to see, seeking is often just a sophisticated way to avoid being still, because stillness forces you to meet what's already inside. And what's already inside is not always pretty, not always polished, but it is the only place truth has ever lived. So you stop, not because you're done, but because you finally see there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to get, No final answer, no perfect feeling, no arrival point where everything locks into place forever. There's just this, you. Now, breathing, watching, being. And strangely, as you drop the search, the beauty starts rising on its own. You start waking up differently. Not with urgency, not with pressure, not with a mental list of how to optimize the day. You simply wake up. And that, in itself, is enough. You no longer measure your morning by productivity. You no longer measure your worth by momentum. You no longer measure your life by how far you've come. Because you're not going anywhere anymore. You're arriving here again and again and again. You walk slower, eat slower, respond slower. Not out of laziness, out of reverence, because now everything is sacred. The silence, the pauses, even the moments that used to feel meaningless. You start to see, it was never about escaping the moment. It was about learning how to be in it fully. You still have goals, but they're softer now. Less like destinations, more like directions. You still have dreams, but they don't carry urgency. They're not tied to your identity. You've stopped needing the future to validate the present. You've stopped needing proof that you are on the right path. Because the path is no longer a line, it's a field, and you're already standing in it. You are no longer a seeker. You are space. You are stillness. You are the place where all seeking dissolves. You stop asking, what's next? Because next is no longer more important than now. You stop needing signs, needing breakthroughs, needing the universe to send you messages. Because presence has become the only message that matters, not as a concept, not as a practice, but as your natural state. You no longer try to be spiritual. You no longer try to let go. You no longer try to transcend the ego. Because you've seen, trying is just the ego in disguise. The silent belief that now is not enough, that you are not enough. And when that belief finally dies, there is no parade, no ceremony, no dramatic enlightenment, just quiet, just stillness, just breath. And that's where freedom lives. There's nothing to do, nothing to fix, nothing to prove. Only this, you, still, soft, unsearching, unmoving, unapologetically here. And in that here, you are whole. Not because you got what you wanted, but because you finally realized there was never anything missing, only your attention. You've spent most of your life protecting something. An image, a story, a reputation. A version of yourself you thought the world could love. You protected your softness with sarcasm, your truth with silence, your wounds with performance. You hid your doubt behind certainty, your fear behind strength, your tenderness behind wit. You weren't pretending. You were surviving because you believed, like so many of us, that to be fully seen was to be fully at risk. So you built walls. Invisible, elegant, convincing. You called them independence, called them maturity, called them knowing your worth. But deep down, they were just shields. And now, after all the striving, all the healing, all the deconstruction, you arrive at a strange, silent place. There's nothing left to defend. You don't need to be strong. You don't need to be wise. You don't need to be unbothered. You can just be. Raw, open, human. And in that vulnerability, you find a strength you never knew existed. Not the strength to fight, not the strength to endure, but the strength to no longer protect anything that isn't true. Because here's what you've learned. Everything you tried to protect was never who you were. It was who you thought you had to be safe, to be accepted, to be loved. But real love doesn't require armor. And real freedom asks you to take it off. You start noticing there's nothing left to hide. You stop polishing your presence, stop rehearsing your answers, stop packaging your emotions to make them easier for others to digest. You just show up, tired, soft, confused, clear, tender. Whatever is real in that moment, you allow it. You don't shrink from it, you don't dramatize it, you don't defend it, you just live it. Because now you see, your truth doesn't need armor, it just needs space. You don't owe anyone a version of you they find easier to accept. You don't owe them certainty. You don't owe them spiritual performance. You only owe yourself the honesty of not pretending anymore. You stop guarding your softness because it no longer feels dangerous. You stop hiding your joy because you no longer fear it'll be taken from you. You stop managing your tears because now you know they are cleansing, not weakness. You stop explaining your distance because your peace no longer asks to be justified. And slowly, you become free. Not because you've gained something, but because you've put something down. The need to be anyone else but the quiet, true being you were always meant to be. Control only works on those who fear being seen. Manipulation only works on those who still have something to prove. But when you drop the armor, when you stop defending an identity, when you release the illusion that you must be someone to be worthy, you become untouchable. Not because you're hiding, but because you're finally real. You're no longer triggered by criticism, because there's no mask left to protect. You're no longer seduced by praise, because you've stopped needing approval to feel valid. You're no longer addicted to being understood, because you've stopped outsourcing your clarity. And in that space, a quiet power rises. A power that doesn't shout, that doesn't seek, that doesn't prove, just is. You don't react, you respond. You don't chase, you observe. You don't grip, you allow. Because now your strength is not in what you hold, but in what you've let go. Especially the need to protect a self that never truly existed. And suddenly you walk through the world differently. Unhurried, unshaken, unbothered. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you finally care from a place that no longer demands anything in return. You stop being afraid of being misunderstood. You stop fearing the silence after you speak your truth. You stop flinching when someone walks away, because you've seen what happens when you stay. When you stay with yourself. When you don't abandon your knowing just to be more likable, digestible, or polite. You've felt the cost of protecting an identity. You've carried the weight of constant self-editing, and now, you're done. You stop being a character and become presence. You stop being a shield and become space. You stop being a version of yourself and return to the core that never needed protecting in the first place. That quiet place, that soft ground, that center beneath all storylines. It was never afraid. It was only waiting for you to stop pretending you needed anything more than to be here. And here, you are unguarded, but not exposed. You are vulnerable, but not fragile. You are fully open, but untouchable. Because you finally understand, when there's nothing left to protect, there's nothing left to control. And when there's nothing to control, there's nothing left to fear. After the letting go, after the deconstruction, after the silence, the detachment, the softening, the returning, what's left? You. But not the you you've known, not the thinker, not the role, not even the observer. Just presence, wordless, still, unshaken. The you that doesn't speak but is always here. The you that was never born, never named, never afraid. There's no excitement in this place, no fireworks, no spiritual high. Just clarity, weightless, vast, undeniable. You look at your life, the people, the stories, the patterns, and you no longer feel the need to fix anything. Not because you've given up, but because there's nothing left to fix. The mind still moves, but you don't follow it. Emotions still rise, but you don't drown in them. Thoughts still come, but they don't define you anymore. They're like birds across the sky. Not intruders, just passing shadows on something far more spacious. And that's what you've become. The sky. Not the storm, not the cloud, not the weather, but the sky itself. Still, infinite, unattached. This presence doesn't need identity. It doesn't seek recognition. It doesn't crave narrative. It simply is. And you, for the first time, feel the peace that asks for nothing. Not even to be called peace. You no longer try to be present, because the one who tries is gone. Presence just is. There's no more gap between you and the moment. No more effort to come back to now. No more tug of war between past and future. What's here is not something you maintain. It's what's always been underneath everything you were busy trying to hold. It feels like peace, but not the kind you imagined. It's not warm, not blissful, not emotional. It's neutral, still, infinite. Not because it's numb, but because it holds everything without becoming anything. And slowly, you realize you are not present. You are presence. There is no separation, no duality, no one watching, no one doing. Just this. Just being. No you achieving silence. Only silence, radiating quietly through this form you used to call me. And in that, a deep surrender happens. Not the kind you choose, but the kind that happens when there's no longer anyone choosing. No final release. No grand finale. Just the falling away of everything that was never real. And what remains? That which can't be named. That which was never missing. That which was always here. Love begins to change. Not the romantic kind, not the familial kind, not even the self-love you worked so hard to cultivate. Something deeper, something wordless, something you can no longer direct at someone or something. Just love as presence, not a feeling, not a bond, not an expression, but the field in which all things appear and are already enough. You look at a stranger and feel no need to define them, no need to like or dislike. You look at your own thoughts and don't argue with them, don't correct them, don't cling to them. You let everything be because you are no longer trying to be anything. And in that space, what remains is love. Not the kind that clings, but the kind that releases. Not the kind that asks, but the kind that sees. Not the kind that wants to be held, but the kind that is always holding. Love not as possession. Love not as relationship. Love as existence. You don't feel loving. You don't need to. You don't try to act from love. You don't need to, because there's no more you in love. There's just this open, soft, undemanding presence that allows all things to come and go without resistance. And it feels like nothing. And it feels like everything, because it asks for nothing and gives everything. Eventually, even the idea of awakening dissolves. Even the notion of being present becomes too heavy. You don't remind yourself to breathe. Breath simply happens. You don't remind yourself to return to now, because you never left. You don't observe your thoughts, because there's no one watching anymore. Just thoughts, moving like wind across the sky of what you are. There's no longer someone meditating, no you practicing silence, no self-dissolving. All of that belonged to the journey. But now there is no journey. There is just this. What remains is not spiritual, not philosophical, not special. It is utterly ordinary. So ordinary, in fact, that the mind keeps overlooking it, searching for something more dramatic. But this quiet, this stillness, this being is what everything else was pointing to. It was never far, never complex, never hidden, only always here. And now, you stop trying to live it. You stop trying to grasp it. You stop trying to hold it. You simply let it live you. You become the silence, not as a metaphor, as a fact. And from that silence, life continues, unforced, unclaimed, unfolding. Nothing to protect, nothing to achieve, nothing to seek, nothing to fix. Only this, presence, breathing itself through what once believed it had a name. There is no ending here. Not because it goes on forever, but because there was never truly a beginning. You didn't start this journey. It started itself through you. And now it completes itself, not with a climax but with a return to the space before the seeking, before the self-definitions, before the striving, the space that was always empty, open, undeniably alive. You don't need a conclusion. You don't need a final insight. You don't need a takeaway to carry forward, because there's nothing left to carry. All that you needed to drop, you dropped. All that you thought you were, you saw through. And all that remains is what has always been here. Silence, presence, and the vast, gentle truth that nothing was ever missing. You are not awakened, you are not enlightened, you are not transformed. These are labels for what cannot be held. What you are now is too simple to name, too quiet to announce, too alive to define. So you let it be. No summary, no final words, no next step. You close the book, not because you've reached the end, but because you no longer need to read what you've become. No more lessons, no more tools, no more truths to collect. Only this moment, unlabeled, uninterpreted, unowned. No one is guiding, no one is being guided. There's just life, not your life. Just life, flowing through what once believed it was separate. The voice you followed through these pages, it's quiet now. Not because it ended, but because it dissolved into the very silence it was pointing to. There's nothing more to say, and in that nothing you might feel something stir. Not an answer, not clarity, not a revelation, just breath, just stillness, just you, no longer on a path, no longer building an identity, no longer asking for anything more. And in this last moment before the words vanish entirely, if you listen closely, not with your mind but with your being, you might notice you were never reading a book. The book was reading itself. Through you. And now that it's done, you don't need to hold it anymore, because the space it pointed to is already holding you. So there is no ending, only a soft exhale, a quiet smile, a final letting go of even the need to understand. Now let the page turn on its own.